Hello everybody. So we'll continue the lecture about fertility. Previously we gave a brief introduction about conceptualization and measurement of fertility. Then we talk about a framework to measure and predict fertility. And then we talk about trends and patterns of fertility in the world, and then we focus a little bit in the US. So now we are going to talk about male fertility. So we're going to go all the way to slide 54. So let's just go there. Male fertility is a topic that's rarely examined in fertility studies. So there are not as many studies about male fertility as there are about female fertility. And there are some different reasons for not having so many studies investigating how many children men have. And these reasons are related to biological, methodological, and sociological reasons. Biological because there is a wider range of childbearing years for males, so they can, biologically speaking, they can have children between the ages of 15 to 79 years of age. And theoretically, there is no limitation on the number of children that males can have. So it makes it difficult to actually measure the number of children that males have throughout their, let's say, their childbearing years, because of this wide range on the ages that they could have children. So it makes it a little more difficult to estimate these male fertility rates. For methodological reasons, there is less data available for males than for females. Usually when you have surveys, we get information about the number of children that women had. And also because even in registration data, in registration certificates, like birth certificates, it's common to have birth certificates in which you don't have information about the father's name and the father's identification. And that's really the case that happens a lot in developing countries. And for sociological reasons, males often are regarded as breadwinners, so it's in some societies, more conservative societies, they have little involvement in fertility except for the fact of impregnating women. But since they are not regarded as, in some societies, as the ones responsible to raise the children, that question about male fertility is usually not asked as often by sociologists and demographers and other social scientists. But there are several points that make it important for us to understand male fertility across in different countries. And the main topics are related to this greater variance within males related to their fertility rates, and also marital status actually is a good predictor of male fertility, so it'd be interesting to investigate those patterns. And there are different patterns of male fertility that will be interesting to study in our society. So let's just go a little bit on each one of these 3 points. In terms of greater variance within males, this greater variance contributed by the male sex, it's much higher than the female sex. I mean, in other words, usually you have a high proportion of women who have children. In the previous lecture, we saw that now we have a greater proportion of women who are not having children at all throughout their lives, but usually most of women, they have children, or their proportion of women who have children is higher than among men. So we still see a lot of males that don't have children throughout their lives. And on the other hand, there are men who have large number of children. So it would be interesting to try to understand this greater variance of fertility within males that make some of them don't have children at all, and some of them have large number of children. And this variation is much more pronounced among men than among women. And in terms of a marriage as a fertility determinant, male fertility is likely to be influenced by marital status and employment status. More specifically, married and employed men usually have higher number of children ever born than men who are not married and those men who are unemployed. So it would be also interesting to see some more studies trying to investigate different levels of fertility among men by marital status and by employment status. So whether they're single, whether they are married, or whether they're employed, and whether they are unemployed. And then the third point, the different patterns of male fertility. Age-specific fertility, it begins in a little later among men, and they stop much later among men than among women. We saw it starts around the ages of 15 and goes up to 79 among men, and among women, usually we measure fertility between 15 and 49 years of age. So there is much more variation in terms of the age that they can have children, and overall, the males' total fertility rates, they are higher than the female total fertility rates, especially in countries with males and with male and female TFRs higher than 2.2. So exactly in countries that have total fertility rates higher than 2.2 children per woman or per man, you have in those countries, in developing countries, usually higher levels of total fertility rates among men than among women. And in a lot of those developing countries, you see men having multiple partners, and that makes their overall fertility rates on average being higher than female fertility rates. So it'd be good to also investigate those patterns, those differentials, and see how exactly they vary in countries that have higher TFRs and those that have lower total fertility rates. So in terms of cohabitation patterns by sex, there is a higher tendency of women to cohabit than men overall. So usually there is a higher percentage of women who live with their partners without being formally married. And this difference is more evident among women who previously lived alone, also among women who are foreign-born, and also among women who live in fragmented families. So it would be interesting to see some studies that try to understand the fertility levels among men and women by cohabitation patterns. So pretty much trying to see how male fertility and female fertility, they vary and they are different from each other when you take into account different patterns of cohabitations that men and women are experiencing, and taking into account that usually the levels of cohabitation are higher among women than men. And in terms of marriage and fertility patterns, so there's like different marriage and fertility patterns by sex. There is a stronger negative effects of educational attainment on fertility among women compared to men. So usually lower educated women, they tend to have higher fertility than higher educated women, and those differentials between women who have low education and those who have high education, these differentials are much higher than the differentials among men. So the same way, low educated men tend to have higher fertility and higher educated men tend to have lower fertility, but the differentials are not so wide as when we investigate the case of women. And also unemployment is related to man's postponement of marriage. So when you have an economic recession, some issues, increases in unemployment rates in a specific society, you see the postponement of marriage among men. So the age of at first marriage among men increases, exactly related to these economic variations, these economic recessions that you see in different countries. And we also see that there is a stronger religion effect among women than men. So you have all these different patterns that vary between men and women in relation to their fertility levels. So education, economics, in this case unemployment rates, and religion, they affect the chances of men and women having children, but they affect the chances of men and women having children in different ways. So it would be interesting to investigate these differentials by sex. So what is interesting for us would be to have more research about male fertility. So there is much needed incorporation of gender studies into demography. That's increasing a lot in these last decades, but we still need much more research to try to understand these differentials by gender in our society in terms of fertility. And fertility and parenting involving both men and women would be interesting to also be investigated because of all the changes that we have been experiencing in more recent years, that men are starting to be more involved in education of their children and taking more responsibility in parenting. So it'd be interesting to see how the levels of fertility of men vary now that they have a bigger role in parenting their children. So this is the end of our lecture related to fertility, and these are the references that we use here. So thank you very much for your attention,